Thank you, Mr. President. I'm pleased to be able to follow my friend and colleague, the senator from Arizona, and while she is still on the floor, I want to thank her personally for the Herculean efforts that she has made throughout this process. It has not been easy. It has sometimes been challenging, and sometimes it takes somebody who just exudes optimism and enthusiasm and a deep-hearted, deep-seated belief that what we are doing is good and it's right for all the right reasons. We have acknowledged here on the floor, each and every one of us, this infrastructure bill is not the perfect bill, but I am waiting, Mr. President, I am waiting for the day when we here in the United States Senate can come to a place where all 100 of us agree that we have the perfect bill. But what we have for the Senate to consider is a product that is really built around core fundamentals, core principles that a group of senators, equally divided, came together months ago to work through, knowing that the work was going to be hard. This is probably one of the most consequential bills that I have been involved with in my Senate career in the close to 19 years that I have been here. What we are presenting to the Senate is truly historic in its proportions. It's historic in its impact going forward. This is truly legacy infrastructure that we're speaking about. Yesterday was a little frustrating. We've had some frustrating days where colleagues were sitting and waiting, hoping for things to move more rapidly than they were, and that's challenging. We have a process here in the Senate that is hard for those on the outside to understand, and oftentimes hard for us on the inside to understand. But it is a process that, after a period of time, yields the results. And so as I was visiting with fellow senators, I overheard somebody say, "I'm not really sure how we got here. How did we get to this point?" Well, I'll tell you, Mr. President, it wasn't magic. It wasn't magic that produced a legislative package that, again, is historic in its funding for roads, rails, bridges, ports, ferries, waterways. It was certainly not an accident that negotiated this 2,700-page document that works to meet the broadband needs of Americans, particularly in unserved or underserved parts of the country, like my state in Alaska. But, Mr. President, it also wasn't inevitable that this infrastructure deal would come together, and yet that's all following what we have learned in this past year and a half dealing with the COVID pandemic and the reality that we have true disparities when it comes to basic infrastructure like clean water, sanitation facilities, energy. It was not inevitable that this infrastructure deal would come together. In the age of cynicism and punditry, we kind of grow accustomed around here to believing that it's hard to get good things done in Washington, D.C., and that's not good for any of us. Those of us here in the Senate, we signed up to do a job. We were sent here to do a job. We were sent here to work. And, Mr. President, that's it. That's how we came to be where we are, through work, through hard work, through compromise. So it wasn't magic, it wasn't accidental, it wasn't inevitable. We went to work, and for a time, I think we really banished the demon of faction that casts his scepter all too often. Alexander Hamilton warned us of this polarizing temptation, and as the champion of infrastructure, or they called it internal improvements in the days of the Founding Fathers, I'm hoping that he's looking favorably on us today. But again, this has not been an easy road, this infrastructure project. Every morning, those of us that were involved in these negotiations, we'd wake up not surprised to read in the paper or see on TV that something had happened outside our control that was designed to kill this package. And every day, instead of taking in those headlines, we saw our constituents. We heard from them. We heard from the people across this country urging us to continue. People like Carl Yucatel, Mario Cordero, Chris Connor, they penned an op-ed in one of our Alaska newspapers, and they urged us to advance the bipartisan infrastructure framework, because for them, the emphasis on what it would do to build out our ports and our waterways were significant. The emails, the phone calls that we received reminded us of the infrastructure and how important it is for industries, for the jobs, for Alaskans, for folks all over the country, for health, the future. And they reminded us that we have an opportunity to do something that actually matters in their lives and in their communities. And the other thing that I heard, Mr. President, they wanted us to do it together. Figure it out, you guys. Work together. When you look at the survey data that is out there, it's pretty resounding. Several different polls show 87% of Americans overwhelmingly support for fixing infrastructure. The list of organizations that support it, everyone from the American Wire Rope Fabricators to the Institute of Manufacturers of Explosive to the National Governors Association to the Steel Manufacturers Association to TechNet. This bipartisan infrastructure package proves that good things can happen in Washington, D.C., but that it takes work. And it takes a majority of those of us in this chamber deciding that it's better to get some of what our constituents want rather than none of it. It's better to make progress and actually deliver results to your constituents rather than just delivering a message. We do a lot of messaging around here. And as my friend, the senator from West Virginia, reminds us, a message doesn't fix a pothole. Now, I have been disappointed that we haven't been able to get some of the amendments that we have heard about today. We've heard Senator Shelby from Alabama talking about defense infrastructure. We've heard the senator from Texas, Senator Cornyn, talk about flexibility to the states. We've heard the senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey, working with Senator Wyden and Senator Lummis on the cryptocurrency issue. And so, again, is this perfect? No. But is it a process that has delivered us to a place where we are delivering results to the people who have sent us here? Mr. President, I was on the floor late last week outlining many of the benefits that Alaskans will see from this measure, but I want to take a few more minutes this afternoon to highlight just a couple more in perhaps some detail. Because, as I've mentioned, and everyone knows, part of the role or the view that I offered in our bipartisan working group was to make sure that the needs of rural Americans were met. And this bill addresses some of the greatest infrastructure needs that again, we see in rural America, but also in urban, and everyone in between, to connect them in ways that we haven't before. Southeast Alaska, this is the region of the state that I grew up in. It's an islanded archipelago. It is not possible to travel by road from one city in the southeastern part of the state to another, for the most part. Our capital is not accessible by road. Our reality is that we either travel by airplane or we are traveling on the water. So a strong ferry system, the Alaska Marine Highway System, is absolutely essential to local economic development, to quality of life, to community well-being. There are 35 different ports along the Alaska Marine Highway System. This spans an area of 35,000 miles. I'm only looking at my colleague from Delaware because we've been working on the ferry initiative, and he's proud of the ferry system that he has there. But I got a lot of water that I've got to cover, and it makes it challenging. It makes it challenging, but it's no different than Delaware in terms of the significance that these small ferries can offer to people as they're moving their families around, as they're moving the basketball team, as they're going to Costco in Juneau and then delivering them to Hoonah, to those military who are PCSing, going outside the state. They've got to move their families and all their goods and the dogs and the trucks, and they got to get out of town, and they get out by way of the ferry. It's easy to compare Alaska's ferry to an urban bus or subway system or other form of mass transit that receives operations support. But until now, because Alaska's communities are rural and not urban, our ferry system hasn't been eligible for any meaningful federal support for its operations. There's been some federal funding available through allocation formula or grant program to the ferry system for both construction and maintenance, but now ferry operators will be able to use funding for construction, maintenance, repairs, and operations costs. In so many parts of Alaska, the marine highway system is the only highway. It is the only highway, so it is truly an essential mode of transportation. When you come from a state where over 80% of your communities are not connected by road, again, you figure it out. It's air, it's on the ocean, it's in the rivers. But more often than not, our transportation is not roads. So to make sure that we are addressing this essential sector of transportation, we included languages that establishes a program for essential ferry service to support our rural communities. So through this program, the Department of Transportation will be able to provide funds to the states to provide for essential ferry service. We're also looking forward as we think about how our ferries move, how our school buses move, how our vehicles move, and we know that this administration has moved out very aggressively when it comes to EVs. There's language in this bill that helps to facilitate that, but again, when you're thinking about what is on the roads, electrification of our vehicles or our school buses or our city buses, let's not forget what I just referred to, and that's these effectively buses that are on the water. So what are we doing to electrify or to look to alternative fuels for our ferries? This is not a new concept. In the Scandinavian countries, where again hydropower is in great abundance, as it is in Southeast Alaska, an electric ferry system makes sense. So we're kind of pushing out on this to build out this notion, this concept that we can reduce emissions with our ferries by using alternative fuels or onboard energy storage systems and other related charging infrastructure, again, to reduce our emissions or to produce zero onboard emissions under normal operations. So the folks in Skagway and Haines are looking at this with great interest because they view that as a real opportunity. Diesel doesn't come cheap up there, and that's what moves those ferries around. But these communities, Skagway, is powered by hydro. So let's pull this all together. So I mentioned the potential for EV and low-emitting ferries, but I'm reminded that the United States has and will continue to be a leader in energy production, and we certainly know that in my state. And we're going to need to continue being an energy superpower. As we're continuing to advance as a society, we're going to be using more energy, we're going to be using more electricity, and yeah, we're going to need to continue to produce much of it in the good old-fashioned way for a long time to come, but electricity is becoming increasingly important. It's vital to so many facets of modern life, and this bipartisan infrastructure package takes that electrified future into account. So looking at the different ways that it enhances the broader energy system by investing in next-generation clean energy production. There's 3 examples I'll just cite that are pertinent to Alaska. There's funding for advanced nuclear reactors, including micro-reactors. You might not think about Alaska and nuclear or micro, but it holds great promise for deployment in certain rural and remote areas. We also provide for funding for hydropower and marine energy research. We've got a great hydrokinetic energy research center at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We provide for renewable energy projects, including geothermal. We've pioneered in this. In fact, we've got the Secretary of Energy who's going to be visiting the state shortly and who will have an opportunity to look specifically at the low-temperature geothermal as well as promising opportunities that we have in the Aleutians. More energy production from more types of energy means greater resilience, greater affordability, greater access with reduced emissions. So let's consider the ways the bill directly impacts the electric grid and the power sector. 3 areas, again, that are pertinent to Alaska and to rural areas. We have included a measure that I had introduced, the PROTECT Act, which authorizes funding to improve our cyber defenses in smaller communities. I think we recognize we have a big focus on the bigger communities, but your utilities in your smaller communities still have to provide for that cyber protection. The bill also sets aside grants for small utilities, like we have in Alaska, to prevent outages, to enhance resilience, hardening of the grid. This is going to help in preventing wildfires that can be caused by power lines or other disruptive events. We're talking about weatherization, fire prevention systems, installing equipment underground, maintaining utility poles and power lines. We also provide support for rural and remote areas in many communities in the state for the modernization of generation, for transmission and distribution. So this is going to help with cost effectiveness, it's going to help with energy efficiency, with microgrids, siting, upgrading, as we shift to cleaner sources of energy. So again, I think it's important to recognize that we are working to not only address the transmission, but distribution, generation, and what we're really looking to do is look towards the future, a future in which we'll need more energy production, more electricity, more batteries, a more secure grid. And as we are doing this, as we are building this all out, I want to make sure that we do ensure that all Americans are included in this energy and infrastructure transition. And I speak specifically now to our Alaska Indian, American Indian, our Native peoples around the country. This bill, this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is really a historic achievement for all of us who are concerned with American Indian, Alaska Native tribes and villages. I'm the vice chair of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee, and I have worked hard to make sure that Indian country's voices have been heard. Let's look at the Indian Health Service. It has a vital sanitation construction program. We're talking about water and wastewater, things that most of us just take for granted. We provide $3.5 billion in funding for American Indian, Alaska Native tribes and villages to complete all of the identified sanitation projects. These are projects that have been on the books for way, way too long. I'm reminded by my friend Val Davidson at Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. She testified before our Indian Affairs Committee about both the funding needed in Native communities and sanitation's really significant impacts on health. And she shared a story, her own personal story, but also a statistic that 1 in 3 infants in communities from her region without adequate sanitation are hospitalized in their first year, simply because they lack basic water sanitation services. And it's not just a visit to a hospital as an infant that is scary, but so many then develop long-term health problems, which are absolutely unacceptable. Any infrastructure bill has to live up to our federal government's trust obligations to our tribes. This is vital to allowing tribes access to water for their health and for their livelihoods. So within the bill, we provide $2.5 billion to fund Indian water settlements. Now, Outside the legal world, most people know Indian water settlements by the term water rights. But the outstanding settlements include the Amat, the Crow, the Navajo Gallup, White Mountain Apache, Blackfeet Nation, Navajo, Utah, Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and the Arizona Water Settlement Act. So this funding is going to complete the balance of each and every one of these settlements. We also provide $250 million for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to help build and repair irrigation, power, and sanitation systems, because you've got to be able to move clean water from one place to another and keep it clean and be able to use it productively. We provide grants for Native village firefighting training, resilient transportation infrastructure, a Native youth public land corps to restore and protect ecosystems, adaptation projects for climate change impacts, and funding for a new program to provide Indian tribes grants to clean up orphan wells. There's more included in this. There's $110 million set aside for tribal bridge investments. There's the Tribal Transportation Program, eligibility for grants under advanced energy and battery manufacturing and recycling programs. We're really looking to ensure that we are prioritizing infrastructure needs in tribal areas. I haven't mentioned broadband, but absolutely significant. We know that broadband deployment on tribal lands has lagged far behind the rest of the nation, and so to address this, the bill includes an additional $2 billion for tribal broadband connectivity grants. We know, we've heard it on this floor by all of us, Republicans and Democrats, urban and rural, we know that broadband is vital to education, healthcare, economic development, self-governance. It applies absolutely across the board as we think about the needs in Indian country. And I think we know that the federal financing provisions, the dollars going forward, are significant, but we also know that it's not just about the funding, it's about making these programs work better. So we do things like requiring expedited environmental review for tribal transportation safety projects. We streamline categorical exclusions by empowering the tribes in relation to the federal government. Within the middle mile grants, there's consultation with the tribes on a process to designate tribally unserved and underserved areas. So there's so much that we have really focused on in ensuring that Alaska Natives, American Indians, those are Native people around the country are included in these many provisions as they relate to infrastructure, including grid infrastructure resilience and reliability. So, Madam President, I've spoken for a while now on three specific areas where I've chosen to highlight, certainly within marine transportation, the benefits that places like Alaska will see, the significance of energy production and what this infrastructure bill will provide there, and benefits to our Native peoples around the country. And Madam President, I want to conclude my comments by ending with where I began, which is to acknowledge the efforts of so many who have really got us here today, not through a miracle, not through an accident, not through inevitability, but just through hard work. I am very pleased to have been part of this group, really honored to work with such hard-working people and their teams, led by Senator Sinema, who just spoke, and Senator Portman. Their leadership has been, in my view, really extraordinary. The work that they have put behind managing us all to this point deserves the recognition. And I also want to acknowledge the good work of the chairman and the ranking member on the Energy and Public Works Committee, Senator Carper and Senator Capito, who really laid the base for so much of this bill. So to the G10 and the broader G22, all those who have contributed so much, I convey my thanks. I also want to acknowledge colleagues on the other side of the Capitol here, those that are known as the problem solvers over there. They really have jumped in, rolled up their sleeves, and helped helped us in solving problems when it comes to this infrastructure package. And I'm looking forward to being able to move this legislation, this package, from this body tomorrow to send it over to the House so that they can then pick up those efforts. But I'm pleased that we have come to this place after a long process, after a tough process, but one where we were really able to focus on common goals that we identified at the outset and we really held true to, that we were going to be dealing with core infrastructure. Core infrastructure. We agreed that we were not going to impose new taxes. We agreed that we needed to ensure that the spending pay-fors were true and legitimate. We agreed that long-term spending on infrastructure needed to improve our nation's efficiency, our productivity, our GDP and our revenue, and not increase inflation. And Madam President, we have achieved that. We set out these parameters and we achieved it, but we did it with a lot of give and a lot of take. And so, while the end product is not something that any one of us individually would have written, I am very proud to be able to support what we have worked to bring to this body, again, with the help and hard work and collaboration of so many members. I am disappointed, Madam President, that immediately after we advance this bill tomorrow, the infrastructure package, that we will turn to a wholly partisan exercise, one that, in my view, taxes and spends without limit, a wish list that really knows no limit. But for now, let's move to this infrastructure bill. Let's get it to the House. Let's do what people in Alaska, what people in Illinois, what people around the country have asked us to do, and that is to address our nation's competitiveness, our nation's efficiency, and our nation's advantages by securing and ensuring that we are able to move, to connect, and to provide for our country's needs. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.